Oh, hello, I'm Philip Jessup. I'm a landscape photographer who's been working here in Toronto for over 20 years, and this is an exhibit of my retrospective of images taken over those 20 years. I'm particularly concerned about landscape that's affected by climate change and other environmental stresses. So many of the images you'll see here are places that are going to vanish or are threatened by environmental change or human intervention. I'll give you just a very quick tour of the exhibit. This image here, the largest in the show, is a tree located behind Sunnybrook Hospital in the ravine there. It was fall, everything was turning red, and what you're looking at is poison ivy. So to me, it was sort of indicative of the change that occurs in our ravines here in Toronto. Over on the left, the last sassafras stand of woodland on Plum Island off the coast of Massachusetts, which has protected the coast there from hurricanes and floods. But Plum Island itself is going to be underwater in 40 or 50 years. So in a way, it's emblematic of change occurring there. And the image to the right of the big tree behind Sunnybrook is a mangrove forest in the Sian-Kan Biosphere Reserve in Mexico. Mangroves are very important because they protect the coast from hurricanes, but they're also subject to sea level rise. So this is a picture of a very important woodland that's under stress because of rising sea level. This is an image of what's called the Lord of the Rings tree in a swamp just 2 hours north of Toronto in Minising Wetlands. It's also a wetland very important because it controls flooding around Barrie and contains the silver maple grove that's been there for hundreds of years. It also is under threat because of climate change. The variable weather has killed off a lot of trees in the area. But I've been canoeing here since 2010. It's really a beautiful area. And these are the kind of areas I really like to shoot. Areas that might be difficult for you to get to, but ones that I've really enjoyed, particularly with my wife. And so we've done a lot of canoeing in these areas. And so my photography is a way of bringing images to you and to the public that you might not have seen otherwise, that are ones that we hope will continue if we do the right things on climate change. What inspired me to photography was my professional career. I've been an environmental activist all my life. I was executive director of the Toronto Atmospheric Fund for almost 10 years. And climate and environment have been my work over many years. So the photography, in a way, is an extension of my professional life and a way of bringing images to people to help them think about what's happening on the planet. I've been particularly interested in wetlands because they're really where life began, and they are very important they provide many important ecological services to us. They filter water, they protect us from hurricanes, such and such. And here's one in Hong Kong. It's called Mai Po, and it lies on the border between China and Hong Kong. And it's where I fell in love with mangroves, actually, because I love the smell of the mud. I love the isolation, even the bugs. It's a really amazing place. You feel like you're back in ancient times when the earth was being formed. So that's where I fell in love with mangroves. Back in 2010, I got a grant from the Toronto Community Foundation to photograph the Arctic, which is melting because of climate change. And I went to Pond Inlet, which is the village you see here. And indeed, it was melting. They'd lost about 2 months of sea ice. You can see the melting occurring over here, just off the coast. And that sea ice is very essential for polar bears and other wildlife in the area. And it's really affecting the lifestyle of the Inuit because about 25% of their diet comes off the ice. But if there's no ice, there's no food, and they have to bring it in from Montreal, which is very expensive. I spent, when I was a young man, I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. And the Marshall Islands are a set of atolls that are very close to the level of the sea, and they will all be underwater in about 40 years. Now, here's an image of one of the atolls in the Marshall Islands, Arno Atoll. And it's at low tide. You can see the coral reef and the tiny little islands along the reef. It's a whole culture that will disappear in the next 50 years. In the last 2 years, I've become very interested in photographing Iceland and the lava fields in Iceland because of the nature of the place. The landscape is absolutely beautiful. It's not going to vanish, but it is the result of violent eruptions that have occurred over many years. And so I've made multiple trips to Iceland and will continue to do so until I've covered the entire coast. So this exhibit actually features these images from my photography in Iceland the last couple of years. The printing process I'm using is called multiple color over palladium. It's a big term, but essentially it's a hybrid process that involves digital processing of images into 4 negatives and then the printing of those negatives using the typical chemical process. So the first stage is the palladium stage. That's a chemical process, and that lays down the black and white superstructure for the image. And then the 3 color processes after that involve putting pigment into gum, which is long lasting and which hardens and keeps the color on the paper. You start with yellow, goes on top of the palladium. And after a day of drying, we go to magenta, and you can see here the red in the leaves is coming out. And then the final color is cyan, which brings out the greens because cyan and yellow make green. So it's a very arduous process. It takes about 4 to 5 days, can involve a lot of retouching, but what you end up with is an image that looks a bit like a painting, a bit like a watercolor, and is highly archival. You're looking at 100 years or more before any fading occurs. That's yellow. Magenta. And cyan. What I like about this process is it's very natural. The pigments are all from stones, crushed minerals. The gum is from a tree in Africa. The paper is made of cotton. And you end up with an image that is all natural. No artificial anything in the image. And that really appeals to me as an environmental activist. I will be happy to work with the BIA to provide personal tours of the exhibit if you want to sign up with them, and we'll schedule some times when I can be in the gallery with you. This gallery show is now open and it continues until April 13th. The gallery is open most days and it's free. And I hope to be here on March 30th, the end of the month, when BIA's own tour will end in this area. And if I can be here, I'll give a personal tour to those who are accompanying BIA. Thanks for joining me on this tour of my exhibit. It represents 20 years of work, and I hope you will enjoy it and can visit.